Hi there. This is a quick update on the recent blog post that George R. R. Martin just made, in which he said that HBO has shelved several of the potential Game of Thrones spin-offs that were under consideration. And he said this is part of the wider pattern at HBO Max and the new Warner Discovery under David Zaslav of belt-tightening, that this is part of David Zaslav's restructuring because they need to save money. I actually understand that. I know they're in a lot of debt. And he's the new guy that came in and just part of the general restructuring. You've seen how this affected DC projects. That they said this is such a mess. We're going to reboot the DC movieverse for a scale of years. There's similar restructuring going on behind the scenes. We don't know the whole story yet with the other Game of Thrones spin-offs, not the currently greenlit stuff. Zaslav loves House of the Dragon because it's doing very well. Nothing but praise for it. They renewed it immediately. But the other spin-offs, they're considering, what should we have all at once? We don't want everything all at once. We need to plan it out in phases. Which is the smart thing to do, that you don't just instantly cram in too many characters with let's immediately jump to the Black Panther. No, you start mentioning Vibranium in phase 2. Then, in the next phase, you introduce the Black Panther in Captain America. Then only by phase 3 or 4 does that character get a spin-off movie. It comes in phases, and we must respect the phases. You lay a foundation. But still, I understand they've had problems, and I don't blame them. I don't blame Zaslav for rebooting the DC Comics movies. I blame the people who were in charge for the past decade. He wasn't here. Blame the other people for running it into the ground with their mismanagement. Zaslav wasn't responsible for the Whedon cut. He wasn't even here for the Snyder cut. I understand there's stuff going on, but this has led to some retrenching. And most news sites would leave it at that just let's copy-paste what Martin said and then wonder what's going on. The bigger thing here is fans have known since back in October that some of the spin-off pitch ideas were shelved, and we even know specifically which ones. I mean, I was busy at the time, and I was waiting for Martin himself to talk about it, and I guess this is as good a time as any, because fans were checking his agent's website and noticed that some projects were taken down. Late October, about a week before the House of the Dragon finale. Just coincidentally, just happened to be around that time. And this doesn't mean everything is shutting down, but I think it just means they're narrowing down to the one they actually want to make next, which would run concurrently with later House of the Dragon seasons. They're unrelated ideas. But I never seriously thought they'd make 3 other live-action shows at the same time. This isn't going to be as big as the MCU or Star Wars, where we have 3 to 4 shows per year. But I'm thinking alternating years, because it takes 2023 is a gap year for House of the Dragon. They want to start introducing another show to integrate in every other year in those gaps, which is the smart way to do it. I want them to do that, so we don't have to have an off-season again. Well, I will give a brief direct quote just for citation purposes. What exactly did Martin himself say? Direct quote here. For the spin-offs, none have been greenlit yet. That some are developing faster than others, which is always the case with development, but when we say something is in development, that includes that these are all in the pilot script phase. And they could be rejected. They could never even be greenlit to pilot, and as we saw at the Long Night, a pilot can get rejected. So, if you heard that, oh my god, a pilot has been greenlit, you would have heard of that already. When we say, oh, it's in development, no, there's I try to say under consideration and then greenlit. I try not to say in development because people don't know what that means. But anyway, Martin goes on to say, regarding the spin-offs, a couple have been shelved, but I would not agree that they are dead. You can take something off the shelf as easily as you can put it on the shelf. All the changes at HBO Max have impacted us too, certainly. Though he goes on to say, and he concludes with really great news, that the Wild Cards TV show is still moving ahead at Peacock. I mean, I'm really looking forward to that at the Wild Cards universe. Just any news I can get for the Wild Cards TV series is good news. So what exactly is going on with the prequel pitches? I'm going to link in the description box below. I made like a full-hour thing this past summer summarizing the past 5 years of potential spin-off development, because it didn't become entirely clear to us until this summer when a big article came out in a Hollywood Reporter which finally revealed some of it to us. Phase 1 of pitches, these aren't filmed or casting, just pitch treatments that they suggested. The first 5, which was back 2017, were The Long Night, which was a terrible idea, and they picked it for brand recognition. It's White Walker hype. They were trying to cash in on that. Long Night, which they put to pilot, it was a terrible idea, predictably failed. Then A Dance of the Dragons show, which became House of the Dragon, though they went through 2 prior showrunners before they landed on, they rebooted it entirely under Ryan Condal, because they were arguing with him about whether to put time skips in or not when you really need the time skips. Otherwise, they were arguing about whether to start with the beginning of the war or to start when they're teenagers to show why they reached this point. Like they would have skipped season 1. And Martin kept arguing you need to show who these characters are. And Condal finally came along and said he would fulfill Martin's vision of that, so they did. But it was constant tension there about whether to have time skips or not. There was a third one. There were 3 out of 5 that actually developed beyond the pitch phase into they were developing scripts and had writers and things. It was a Doom of Valyria show under Max Borenstein. And that got shelved, but it wasn't outright rejected because Borenstein still wants to make it, and he's actually working his way up the ranks at HBO now, as he's co-running that new LA Lakers show, Winning Time. So he's getting more experience, he's working his way up the ranks, he's signing new contracts with HBO, and he said, like, years from now when I'm done with the Lakers stuff, I'd like to, in a later phase of development, try to work back in the Doom of Valyria show, because that's going to be a big 5-year project. It's not a one-shot, it's like meant to be a flagship project. But we didn't know what the other 2 ideas were that got rejected really soon, the 4th and 5th ideas. Those were a really bad treatment of the Targaryen conquest, which was going to like a revisionist history thing, like, where no, he was this lazy drunk, everyone else was really propping him up. That was a terrible take on it. It deserved to be rejected. And the 5th idea was actually Nymeria and the 10,000 Ships of the Rhoynar. That early, HBO thought this was a really good idea for a prequel. So at the end of the day, The Dance of the Dragons won the first round of prequels to actually go to series, full series. But that was, the first wave was under the old HBO. Then they got bought out by AT&T, they became Warner Media, and by early 2021, we heard of this second of the 2 phases so far of potential prequel pitches, which had 3 live-action things in it. First, they recycled the Nymeria idea that under an entirely new writer, that they thought that was important enough of a prequel era that they recycled it under in let's see if someone else can do it, hired writer Amanda Siegel. Second idea was the 9 voyages of young Corlys the Sea Snake. That you see young Corlys Velaryon in like this Sinbad-like amazing adventurer and explorer, going to the far corners of the world, going to Yee, going to the Summer Isles, going to the polar region, all this stuff he'd do. And the writer they attached was Bruno Heller, the veteran showrunner of HBO's Rome show. So that was also, they hired good writers for all of these. And the third one of the live-action pitches that we heard of in early 2021 was live-action Dunk and Egg, with writer Steve Conrad attached. Now, as late as this past August, Martin had remarked that all 3 of those had advanced from the pitch phase of pitches, this 100-page treatment, to we officially ordered a pilot script phase. So they advanced to the point they were ordering pilot scripts. It doesn't mean it was greenlit to film a pilot, just that they were making the script. They went to the next stage. These were reasonably well developed. They weren't rejected out of hand as bad pitches. They were moving to scripts. And then, of course, the surprise to everyone that there was a secret 4th live-action pitch idea that was a Jon Snow sequel spin-off led and developed by Kit Harington himself. But that's on the table, too. And there's also, beyond live action, there's the animated projects, that there's 3, maybe 4, THR's article mentioned 4, animated projects under consideration, though the only one we know about that Martin has talked about is one on the Golden Empire of ET, which is their version of Imperial China, which I'm not sure. I think animation would be easier to make because you can draw whatever. They don't need to build all these sets and things. But animation goes through different circles and stuff. The point is, back in October, great veteran reporter from the book fandom, for the fandom as a whole, Zionius, who is the same guy that tipped us off that, he knows the websites to check of, wow, the Blu-ray contents list doesn't say there's any deleted scenes this year. It's stripped down in time for Christmas thing. Remember when I made my Blu-ray video and I said he's the guy who tipped me off that there's nothing there? He also knows to check his agent's website. His agent, Vince Gerardis, who you've probably seen in the opening credits as Martin's agent. And there's a couple of potential projects that are listed as we're working on these things in development. Some got taken down in October. Now, the Jon Snow thing was never listed in the first place, even after it got leaked, and Martin admitted it was in development. They just never listed that. Either it's going through a different agent, or because they were annoyed they weren't allowed to talk about it. Animated stuff was never listed on his agent's website, so the ET stuff wasn't taken down. It was never up in the first place, even though he said it was under development. That's why I was saying maybe animation works differently. I think that might still be in development because of the animation stuff. We don't know. And there was more than one animated project. The big thing is those initial first 3 live-action projects we heard of, 2 out of 3 got taken down from his agent's website. That back in October, fans looked, and we saw that Nymeria and the Voyages of Young Corlys have been taken down from his agent's website. But Duncan Egg is still up there. I checked an hour ago, it is still up there today. So this isn't as dire as some of the news sites are trying to make it sound of, oh God, they're shelving everything as part of HBO's ridiculous restructuring. They needed restructuring. There's a lot of debt right now, and as unfortunate as it is, and I disagree with some of the things they're doing, I never really thought that Nymeria or Corlys would be in the first phase of new spin-offs right after House of the Dragon. Simply because even though they were really heavily setting up Nymeria in stray references in season 1, or just talking about Corlys' voyages when you see his haul and everything, there are 2 major problems that both of those potential projects have. They have very little source material, so they're not only are they unfamiliar to the audience, though part of the fun is they're showing exotic new things, there is very little written material for them, even compared to House of the Dragon, and they would be ridiculously expensive to make. These sweeping, epic travel stories with all these special effects, literally fighting dinosaurs and sea monsters and all this other stuff, and seeing vast new exotic cities. The Nymeria show begins with the climactic final battle of the Valyria-Rhoynar Wars, where the Valyrians wipe them out with an army of 300 dragons. That's really expensive. And it's described just in a history book, in an in-universe history book, that there isn't much characterization or dialogue to go with that. In contrast, Duncan Egg is the only prequel to be fully narrativized in POV narrated text, more so even than House of the Dragon, which isn't fully narrativized. It's kind of in between the two, the House of the Dragon versus Duncan Egg. It's a full-out narrative, it's been adapted as graphic novels, and it's a lot cheaper. That was one of its major selling points. Even Ryan Condal pointed out, it's focused on these 2 characters who are just ground-level guys, even though one's a minor Targaryen prince, 13th in line to the throne. They, have a tournament. It's these poor mercenary guys wandering around taking odd contracts and, signing up for tournaments or being household knights and getting embroiled in politics. Duncan Egg, if in an era of belt-tightening where they want to focus also on well-written quality projects, Duncan Egg is both cheap and the known quantity, which has a lot of source material. So I'm not phrasing, as Martin himself stressed, they didn't reject them, they shelved them, because they're expensive. And yet maybe we need to work our way up to that, but glass half full, I choose not to see this as they rejected Nymeria and young Corlys, but that they chose Dunk and Egg. If that makes sense to you, please tell me in the comments. I'm already 15 minutes into this. I wanted to keep a relatively short update, so check out the full hour-long thing I did going on the full background of all of the prequel pitch phases, the spin-offs up to this point. This might not affect the Jon Snow thing at all. I'd be surprised if they got rid of that because it's a recognizable name. I wonder how it's affecting the animated projects, which we wouldn't know about even if they did cancel. But that might be different. But I would like to see Dunk and Egg stuff on this. The one problem is it's hard to set up Dunk and Egg on House of the Dragon because it's the one pitch that takes place after it. Like, you can mention Nymeria or Valyria or Corlys himself. Or when I was younger, here's treasures from my sea voyages. Dunk and Egg is 70, 80 years later that you really can't set it up as well. But it has a big entrenched fandom. It's the first spin-off era. Martin made it in the 90s. It has got the most source material. Check out all my other stuff, and I'll keep you updated as we learn more through all of this restructuring.